So before I ever had these encounters, I really didn't believe much in the paranormal. I had a small fascination for it, but I never really truly believed in supernatural beings until these few odd occurrences. This is a bit of a long story, but I think it's worth telling. I currently date my fiancée, and she's a Native American. We'll call her S. A few years ago, when we first started dating, we kept that a secret, as her mom disapproved of any of her children dating at a young age, that led us to go sneaking out at night to see each other. I'd always leave my house save 9 or 10 p.m., only to sneak back home around 1 a.m. or so. Before I continue, I should give you a layout of our area. The distance between my house and her house is not that far, really, but to get there is pretty damn scary. Our houses are separated by a large highway, and every night I either take a shortcut through a dirt path along the highway next to an old railroad, which is completely pitch black, by the way, or I take a long route through my high school, which is well lit and makes the uneasy feeling of being out late not so bad. Anyways, when we go out and talk at night, she would always jump to the topic of the paranormal, stating that she could hear the dead speak to her and had various encounters with a shadow man when she was young. I just humored her and joked around and told her that one day they would come for her. As time went on, we spoke almost every night, and she told me that her brother was being attacked by a skinwalker. I almost didn't believe her, but I had a gut feeling by the way she looked at me that she was being serious. This was the time where I had introduced myself to her mother as her friend, and I'd regularly stayed at her place once her mom trusted me more. One night, I noticed S burning sage around house, and I inquired about it. This is to ward off the evil spirits and keep skinwalkers away. Skinwalkers? I asked. She gave me a brief explanation of what exactly they were. She had told me that these creatures give up what made them human, to become these things and act like hired guns that stalk your prey. They like to play games with their victims, and they only prey on people who are afraid of them. They like to initiate their gain by whistling, two extremely loud whistles that announce their presence. She claimed their whistling could be heard from miles away. I called bullshit and told her nothing is going to happen to them. After a few nights of them doing this, there was one night that I came over and noticed that she hadn't burnt any saved, and she always did a routine burning at around 8 or 9 p.m. But I didn't mention any of that to her or her family, as the smell of sage always made my nose burn, and it made it hard to breathe. So, as it was getting late and I had to get home, I said my goodbyes and took off. So get to the end of her street, and when you get to the end of it, you end up at a T-bone intersection on the semi-main road. To the north of that road, it leads to the highway to the south, to more neighborhoods. I live northeast from her place. So, naturally, when I get to the intersection, I cross the street and head north. But as I got to the end of her neighborhood, I heard two very loud, distinct whistles cut through the night and sent chills down my spine. My hair all around my body standing on end, and I tried to make out the location of the sound. It was coming miles way down south of the road. One thought popped into my head. She forgot to burn the sage tonight. Part of me wanted to think that this was just an elaborate prank that she had planned, but a deep sinking feeling at the pit of my stomach told me it wasn't. I quickly ran back to her house, as it wasn't that far from the end of the street, and frantically knocked on her door. They had only been about 5 to 10 minutes from when I left, so they weren't asleep yet. I told them about what I had heard, and I told them to burn the sage, just in case. I said mostly to myself. Even though it may not be real, it's better to be safe than sorry, I figured. I make my exit as they finish burning the sage and head back to the intersection. It was very late, I'd say 11 p.m. or 12 a.m. on a school night, so I had to get home quickly. I speed walked across the main street, heading northeast diagonally, and right when I got to the other side, I noticed him. Just across the street was an old man. Normally, I would just play it off as another pedestrian, but this guy, he just stuck out so much. It wasn't really how he looked or how he dressed, it was just how he moved that struck me as odd. The old man looked about in his 60s or 70s, was moving at the pace of a 20-year-old man. I only took a glance at him for a few seconds, but in that time span, this man just stared at me. A deep, cold stare. His eyes wide, with absolutely no expression on his face. Just a flat face, no furrowed brows, no nothing. I walked slowly, keeping him just at the corner of my sight as I watched him. He walked down towards SS neighborhood. He kept his damn eyes trained on mine, training his neck as he walked by, even when I already had my back down. You think I was scared, but I wasn't. I didn't feel any fear. I was just weirded out by his aura or something like that. The man didn't turn into my girlfriend's street. He just continued his fast march down to the south, and I felt a bit of relief and brush it off as some crazy drug addict or something. Time passes, and during that time, just some weird shit happens at SS House. That's another story for another day. No Skin War Walker activity, though. S continued her nightly ritual as usual, and by that time, her mom had brought a witch doctor to bless the home and perform a ritual to remove a ghost bone from S's brother. From what I gather, a ghost bonus, some kind of hex or trap. The trap is a fetish that has been held dear to a manic spirit. It can be almost anything, like a toy doll or a cane, something dear to a lost spirit. And then it attaches its spirit bone to a target host. I guess that not only brought the attention of a ghost, but also a damn skinwalker. Once it was removed from him, things kind of calmed down, but this is where mentioning the high school comes into play. Now, once I go north at the T-Bone intersection, I hit the highway. I have to cross the highway and head east to get to my place, and that would mean that I would take a quick route in the dark dirt road or cut through an abandoned railroad dock onto another street that heads to my school, and from there I cut through my school to go to my house. I decided I didn't want to walk in the darkness, and I cut through the lot. As I got to the street, that LED to my school, I noticed this guy. He's heading toward me on a bike. He's very far away at the time, and I pay him no mind. As I get closer to him, I get further away from the only street light on the street. Keep in mind that the railroad dock is next to the school, so I still have to walk some distance to get to the school. I noticed a sense of eeriness about him. He gave me that similar feeling to the old man, how it just weirded me out, and I caught him staring at me. He would most definitely come for me. I kept calm, walked to the school. Now you think the school was shut out by fences, but it was a very nice school that had no need to build large fences so you could walk past the small metal gates that are set up. It was mostly used to block cars and the like from getting past. No one really vandalized it either, so another reason for no large fences. Once I get halfway through the school, I hear what sounds like a bike and cackling behind me. A feeling of dread sinks in. Oh shit! I whispered under my breath and glanced back, but saw nothing. I hurried my pace as all I had to do was go past one large building and then clear field and jump the only large chain-link fence on the property. Just to give you a better perspective, the entrance I went through is a parking lot, and the path I took is somewhat of a path to allow small vehicles and maintenance trucks to drive through, where buildings with different classes strewn about from left to right is a small road that winded through the whole school. Diagonally, two large buildings occupied the east and west side of the lot. My trip usually meant that I walked between the large buildings and I'd see the field, and from there, my home neighborhood. I remained calm as I was nearing the end of the road and got between the two buildings. As you get to them, there's a large open area with tables and chairs to eat lunch. At this area is not well lit, and it can be pretty damn creepy at night, as the trees and poles can block a clear view ahead. You had to get past that from this route, and regret soon followed as I continued ahead. Should have just stayed the night at SS. I huffed out under my breath, rasping, as I felt very nervous walking through the eating area. Then I hear tapping ahead, as if someone is tapping their knuckles or fingers on a pole. 2 taps. The fucker was annoying, toying with me. What the fuck do you want? I yelled out in anger and annoyance to the direction of the tapping. No response. Just silence. It was too damn quiet. And then, The most fucked up thing I've ever heard in my life is whispered into my ear. I want your skin, in the most horrid, raspy alien voice I had ever heard, like a mixture between a child, a male, and a female, all at once. I freak and nope the fuck out of there. I sprinted the fastest I've ever run in my life, and thankfully I had trained in parkour for a few months at the time and had some decent acrobatic skill, just enough to climb and balance on fences and leap great distances. I leaped onto a table, ran, jumped from the table to table, hearing tapping noises from behind, getting closer and closer. The cackling was slowly getting louder and louder as I was getting to the passage between the buildings. Once I had gotten there, the noises stopped abruptly, but I didn't dare stop or turn back. I just kept going and got to the field and made a mad dash to the only tall fence in this accursed school. Just my luck, right? As I cleared the distance and near my destination, I climbed that damn fence faster than I had ever climbed anything in my life. Gotta love an adrenaline rush. Right as I got to the top of the fence, where I would usually lift my whole body over and toss myself over with one hand on top of the rail, something bit into my wrist. The wrist that was holding my weight. I yelled and I lost my balance, making the fall a pretty bad one. That moment totally screwed up how my body was turned normally. I have been at the needs to handle all the weight of my momentum, but when that happened, I lost concentration. It was a pretty long fall. I would say 8 to 9 feet. I unfortunately landed very badly and put most of my weight on one leg. I slammed the ground hard on my sides. Pain surged into my right knee and down the right side of my body. If it weren't for the adrenaline, I might have just passed out from the pain. I laid there, curled up on the ground, just feeling like it was over and that I was surely dead. And then I noticed the bite mark. It was odd because the bite felt very painful, but this wasn't that deep. 4 small slash marks on the underside of my wrist. I tore a piece of my shirt, wrapped on my wrist, and went back to my house. Thankfully, I gained the strength to walk to the streets ahead, where the rest of the trip was blessedly uneventful. I was amazed the damn thing didn't just leap over and end my life, since it could move at such incredible speeds. The story I had to make up to my parents was so much bullshit that even when they thought I had told them the truth, they instead believed the lie. I can't really remember what I said happened, something along the lines of being depressed and cutting myself, and that made me fall and hurt my leg in the bathroom. Something like that. But what I can tell you from this experience is that I was left with a whole new perspective of otherworldly beings, and that some instance of their existence is true in some way. I know it was a weird thing to tell my parents, but somehow I thought that made me sound less crazy than the actual story. I was not only left with a mental scar, but a permanent injury to my leg. Torn ligaments that caused my knee to become what I now know is a degenerative knee, which means I have signs of an arthritic joint. Well, fuck, man. Lesson learned. Don't take long walks at night and always stay in the light. Because you just never know what might be lurking in the dark. I've been waiting a while to post about this because I wanted to make sure that I'm not just letting my mind run away with me, but it's to a point where I need to bring it up. I just moved from North Carolina to Durango, Colorado. I'm a Sasquatcher at heart. I immediately started looking up area reports in. So doing, I found some nearby in San Juan and decided to drive out. Nothing strange. During my work week, I researched reports for the entire Four Corners and inevitably stumbled back upon Skinwalker stories. I spent a solid day listening to and reading these stories, and then got back to Sasquatch. The next place I decided to scout took me to the edge of the Navajo reservation, though I didn't intend to enter. I just misjudged my distance when hiking. It was nice out. Once I did figure out where I was, I immediately turned around since I was unsure of the permit requirements on the reservation. Hiking out. My dog stopped and tried to pull sideways. I led her over to the grass and she pulled out a bone. It was skinny and small, and it didn't look human at all. I didn't think much of it, and I let her keep it. I think that's where I fucked up. 3 mornings later, I'm in bed, and I get awakened by a wrestling. I thought it was the dog, but she was not in my room. It was coming from outside my cracked window. I got up and crept over, expecting a raccoon or a possum. Under my window, close enough to reach out and touch it, was a mule deer with an impressive rack. I went to grab my camera, and when I got back to the window, it was gone. I never left the room. I never heard it move away. Odd, but I thought nothing of it. The next morning, same time, this time, I decided to be ready to catch a picture for my dad since we hunt together. I got my camera ready and eased the curtain open just a touch. He was in the yard about 7 yards away and facing away from the house at a slant, magnificent. I had no sooner seen him than he turned to face me, head first. But then his hind end appeared to teleport around. He never moved his legs. It's like he was just in one position, and immediately after that, he was in a different one. I slammed my window shut and left the room. Then, in the hallway, I stopped myself and turned around. It was gone when I got back. I couldn't pinpoint what had scared me so badly. Even with Sasquatch, I'm skeptical of every twig crack, hoop, or knock. I attributed the odd movement to it being so early and assumed the streetlight flickered or something. I wrote off my fear as having observed a charging light posture. Since that morning, which was 3 days ago, I've been feeling disconnected from my dog. I keep having strange daytime nightmare scenarios of her just attacking me out of nowhere. I didn't even want her sleeping in my room last night. This is saying something because I love my dog unconditionally, and I know she would never do that, but I just can't shake this paranoia whenever she's around. The final straw that got me is a dream I had about an hour ago. I dreamt that I shot her while she was out sleeping in the yard, and then I took her skin. I raced out to the spot where she found that bone, and there was an old man waiting. I asked him if I could transform now, and he says no, but I can. Then he took the skin from me and flung it around himself immediately, becoming a larger and distinctly more evil form of my beloved dog. Then she ripped me to shreds, and I woke up. I immediately got up to find her. She was in my room asleep. Then I went looking for that fucking bone, and I can't find it anywhere. She's hidden it in the yard. Did I just accidentally influence my experiences during and around sleep with my Day of Walker stories, or am I in some trouble here? Update number 1. I'll be heading back out to the original bone location in an hour with the dog. I plan to bow drill a fire to ceremonial thing for me, long story. Then apologize and offer one of my lucky whitetail antlers from my very first kill back home in the Appalachians. I'll keep you posted. Wish me luck. Update number 2. I'm reporting back in one piece. After leaving an offering, I decided to stay the night just off the reservation. It was a dead still night, eerie but uneventful. Except, I was off on a wood run in the tree line and found a mutilated deer carcass, positioned very strangely. That's all for now. Let's hope it worked. Last update. I talked to my buddy yesterday after work. We had a few of the house brewskis, and then I told my story to him. Oddly enough, I told it to another coworker too, who's Navajo. He just happened to be off having a beer as well. They both kind of went stone-faced when I mentioned the deer and the dream. I then told them of the offering of the antler and tobacco, and they said that was a very smart move, but said that I was stupid to sleep out there, and the carcass may well have been a warning, stay away. In terms of activity, I've had none at the house, and I feel fine. My friends said to let them know if anything else happens, and then they can put me in contact with someone who can help. Things were quiet until today. The dog came prancing happily in half a mule deer in her deer hoof in her mouth. She's obsessed with it, won't keep it outside. When I take it away, she just follows me. It's very out of character. I don't know what to do. My grandpa owned a large herd of sheep, which during the summer grazed in the mountains in central Utah. In the 1960s, his shepherd was a small Mexican man, we'll call him Juan. Juan stayed in a very small trailer in a meadow while tending the sheep. One evening, Grandpa drives up his truck to the mountain to deliver some food and supplies to Juan. As he nears Juan's camp, he starts to see dead sheep all over the ground. Many of the sheep were thrashed into pieces. As he arrives at Juan's trailer, he finds the door shut. He has to kick open the door to get inside, as Juan has locked it. Inside, one is curled up into a ball, mumbling incoherently, seemingly in shock. Grandpa picks up one, throws him into the truck, and takes off down the mountain to get him to a doctor. As he's flying down the twisty dirt road, Grandpa gets this terrible feeling like he's being watched and sees something out of the corner of his eye. By this time, the sun is setting. Light isn't very good. He turns to look out the passenger side window and sees a creature that he describes as looking as an inside-out deer, running alongside the truck, keeping pace. The creature dropped back out of sight, only to come bounding back even faster, running on only its hind legs. The creature then ran across the road right in front of the truck. My grandpa swerved to miss it and ends up rolling the truck down a mountain. Juan is killed in the accident, and my grandpa spends more than a month in the hospital. It's possible that Grandpa was just playing with us, but that really wasn't his style, especially about something as serious as this. He was an old cowboy and swore that it was the truth. He brought it up when we were all making fun of chupacabras. He believed that it was some sort of chupacabra-like animal that he saw, but he's more convinced that it was a skinwalker. It was Christmas night of 2007, at around 8:30 at night. It was Rollback Road in upstate New York. The day was pleasant and festive. Opening presents early in the morning with my sisters, a hearty breakfast made by my dad. Delicious smells from the kitchen as Mom and Dad prepare to feast. Visits from extended family, bringing pies and cakes for dessert. Around 2, we all sat down to eat, and then lazed about for the rest of the afternoon into the evening. At about 8, after everyone had left and the food was all put away for round 2 the following day, I decided to head over to visit my friend in the next village. The drive would be about 10 minutes if I took back roads to get there, so I did. First, a little background on where my friend lived. It was a housing development surrounding a private lake. You might call it a gated community. You could still drive through it freely after hours by entering one of 4 private entry points. Since the community was built around a lake, the road surrounding it went in a spiral sort of shape. The houses were sparsely positioned on the outermost part of the spiral road, closest to the 4 private entry points. As you drove it further, there are a lot more houses positioned closer together, nearer to the lake. My friend lived on the outer edge of this development, so once I reached the entry point, it would only take me another few minutes until I reached his house. His house, along with all the others, were far enough apart that you couldn't see them from the road as you drove by. There were either woods all around with long drives or open fields with long drives. You could see porch lights on in the distance, but that was about it. As I entered into the development, the speed limit dropped from 30 miles per hour down to 20. There were no streetlights in the development, and for some reason, I never put on my high beams. I couldn't go any faster than the speed limit because there were speed bumps in place every 30 feet or so. It was a mild night. I remember having my driver's side window up slightly, taking in some fresh air. I remember driving in silence, which was unusual for me because I normally always listen to music when I drive. I must have been enjoying the quietness after the commotion of the day. I reached a section of road that had barren fields on either side and woods set in the back. Houses were probably nestled back into the trees as I drove. I noticed what looked like someone walking up ahead on the opposite side of the road, coming in my direction. Mind you, I was still going about 20 miles per hour the whole time, so it was probably less than a minute by the time the walker came into clear view. I got a quick scan of it from my windshield before my car, and it were exactly parallel. This is what I saw. It was not a person. It stood on two long legs with long arms hanging down from its shoulders. It was strong-looking, lean, muscular, but not beefy in stature. Yet it looked thin at the same time. It stood at least 7 feet tall and was light in color. I can't be sure whether it was white, tan, yellow, or gray. It didn't appear to have fur, but there was some texture to the skin wasn't smooth. There appeared to be something coming down off its back. I don't know what this was. All I can recall about its face is the small features it had, but the mouth and jaw were notably large, and it had pointed things atop its head. Two things going straight upward with something mingled between the two. That's what I got from a quick scan, and from my observation of it as it neared my car and my car neared it. As my car became parallel to it within a split second, I went from looking out my windshield to looking at it from my driver's side window. In that moment, its face quickly appeared down at me, and all I remember was the mouth opened wide. Out of it came a remarkable scream that I will never forget. It gives me the chills just thinking about it now. It consisted of a high-pitched shriek, but also enveloped by a deep guttural growl. Both sounds happened simultaneously in that scream. I kept driving all the while. This was all happening so fast that I didn't even have a chance to be scared or shocked or feel anything at all. I continued driving, went past my friend's house, and drove home. I called him to tell him what happened and that I just needed to get back. I was probably running on adrenaline to get back home. Later on, I was in total shock after everything had sunk in. Had my driver's side window been opened fully, it would have touched me or worse, taken me. I'm certain of this. To this day, I still haven't worked out what it was. Has anyone else seen or heard anything like this? I'm desperate to know. I was a kid when this happened. My uncle and I were finishing up chopping and gathering firewood for my grandmother because it was getting dark. Driving back on a dirt road at around 30 miles per hour, I had this awful sense of being watched. Before I could turn to look out my window, my uncle quickly shouted, "Don't." I completely froze. My heart felt like it was beating out of my chest, then completely stopped when I heard it tap tap on my window. My uncle sped up and was loudly praying in my native language. I didn't know what was going on and thought it was over until our truck suddenly dipped from the bed. My uncle then started saying, "Look at me," and "Don't turn away," over and over. Then I heard it again, tap, tap, but from the window behind me. It was getting harder for me to breathe, and I wanted to cry. A minute or two passed, and the truck dipped again. My uncle looked around inside. It was quiet besides the truck and the road. He looked at me and said, "We will ask your father to do a prayer in the morning so that the evil will forget our faces." That's the Navajo to English equivalent anyway. I remember curling up on the seat and just staring at the radio, watching the time, listening to my uncle singing Old Prayer until we got to my grandmother's house. I recently called my uncle because I had a nightmare about that night, and we talked about it for a bit. He said, "I didn't see faces, just eyes like brake lights you would see on the road. I watched you." Before hanging up, I tried making a joke out of it. I said, "Why didn't you just step on the brake when it was in the back?" Then he did not laugh, just paused, and then answered, "Because it wasn't alone." I've been a Reddit lurker now and again. I just came across this subreddit, and I wanted to share an experience that I had last summer. Some backs. My boyfriend and I just bought our first house in June on on a lake about an hour northeast of Seattle, Washington. Aside from the lake community we're a part of, there really isn't a large population around here. We're in between a few larger towns, but they're all about a 20-minute drive from where we live. Our house is backed up right against the Cascade Mountains. We're pretty much the last bit of population before the mountains begin. About 30 yards from our driveway is a dead-end road that turns off the main lake road and goes back into the woods a few miles. There are a few gated Forest Service and logging roads that branch out from this road. My boyfriend and I ride our dirt bikes up these roads, and they go on for miles, but there really aren't any other houses in this area, except for a few that are all on the main dead-end roads. For taking the dirt bikes up, I had walked up this road a few times exploring the area, and it always felt a little odd to me. My boyfriend has said things like that road is creepy, even in broad daylight. It totally could have been that it was just very wooded and most spots, and therefore shaded, and the lack of houses that made it seem odd, but I stopped walking up this road for a reason. When we moved in, I was dog-sitting my friend's pit bull Bella. She was about 70 pounds and was a totally fearless brat, and she was kind of aggressive with other dogs and even with some people food handling, things like that. I would walk her up the dead-end road pretty often while I had her, because there were hardly any houses and no traffic. One day we were about 2 miles up the road and had come down a small hill onto a flat treeless area where there was an old abandoned barn and large field that the road cut through. There was tall grass on either side of the road. When we got to the area, Bella's tail went down, and she kept her head really low. She also started to look around and back behind us, just acting nervous, which was odd for her. As we were coming around to turn about 100 yards in front of us was a logging road that went off the road and straight up a hill. It had a large gate at the bottom to keep the vehicles out. My boyfriend and I have put our dirt bikes under this gate before to go riding up the trail, so I know how tall it is. The top bar of the gate comes to my chest, and I'm 5'5". What I saw still scares me to think about. Standing right in front of this gate was a huge black dog. It was standing broadside with its head low, and I'm almost positive it was looking towards us, because I couldn't make out a snout or ears. I couldn't see a tail either, but it may have been lowered between its hind legs. The shoulder of this thing was higher than the top bar of the gate because it was blocking part of it from view. I stopped instantly and held Bella's harness so she couldn't advance forward anymore and catch sight of this thing because aggressive dog problems. I looked at this thing for probably 2 seconds total before turning back and hauling ass back up the road because I heard the thing growl. 100 yards away from it, and I heard this fucking thing growl. This awful, almost hissing growl. I was totally terrified, and at this point so is Bella. It was a long 2 miles back, and I couldn't stop looking over my shoulder, and Bella was also freaked out the whole time. The growling, massive black dog wasn't the only thing I was so terrified of. I also had this awful, awful feeling of fear and dread come over me when I saw it. It was overwhelming, and I've never felt something like it. Even typing this and remembering the details is making me feel jumpy. It took me a long time to feel okay and safe in our new house, especially at night. Even now I have a really hard time if I'm home alone. My boyfriend is 100% certain I saw a black bear. I did not see a bear. I grew up in rural Pennsylvania and have seen more black bears than he will probably ever see in his entire life. This thing have long, skinny legs and a deeply curved rib cage, and a belly similar to a Doberman. Wolves don't live in this area, and even if they did, this would have been an abnormally large and abnormally skinny wolf. Throughout reading Reddit and other places I've come across skinwalker encounters and stories, I pretty much lost my shit when I read the similarities. I'm beginning to become more and more convinced that what I saw wasn't a normal, natural thing. I think it might have been a skinwalker. What do you think? I'm a wildland firefighter with the Forest Service. This is not my story, but it's from an old supervisor of mine, and I completely trust him and believe this account. The setting was 2004 or so, Hell's Canyon area in the middle of Idaho. His crew had been working all day on an emerging incident and were going to be working through the night as well. Being the assistant superintendent of the crew, second in charge, effectively, he was out ahead scouting on an ATV or some such thing. He was working his way down logging road that clearly had not been used in some time when a bobcat or lynx appeared in the middle of the road. But it didn't run away, as they usually would. The thing stood there for a good 10 seconds, screamed at him, and then scampered up a tree not 5 feet off the road. He found this odd, but not particularly unsettling. And just a half mile or so down the road, he finds a small cabin. Also odd, as this is federal land and no private structure should be there. Upon investigation, all the windows had been boarded shut tight, and someone had done a good job of doing so. The doorknob had been punched out and secured to a hole drilled into the log frame by a chain. Someone clearly did not want anything getting in or out. Peering through the hole in the door, he could see that everything in the house was upset. This had him kind of unsettled, so he hopped on his ATV and headed back up the road. Well, here's where it gets really interesting. Right where the bobcat had been, there stood a Native American woman in a badly tattered nightgown and bare feet. Just standing there, he yelled at her, asking if she needed help, but she just screamed at him. The same scream that the cat had screamed at him before, and she climbed right at the tree, faster than any human has a right to be climbing. Obviously, he knocked out of there as fast as he could. Unsure of who or what he had just seen, he asked a local guy about the cabin. After asking around a little, a local Native American hears them talking and informs them that they saw a pumala, in effect a skin changer, a work. Now, I would not believe most people that tried to tell me this, but this is a serious man that did not fuck around about anything. He was dead serious the 2 times I've heard him tell it, and I 100% believe that he saw what he saw. I used to live in a small town in Texas. My town was so small that it wasn't so much town as it was a really big neighborhood with one gas station. My town wasn't completely finished. A lot of the streets had empty lots and woods. Even though the town was 60 years old, it was possible to walk onto a lot, head to the woods, and get lost if you didn't know exactly where you were going. And since we had deer and wild animals running around, it wasn't a good idea to go wandering, if you know what I mean. My house was in the oldest part of this town. I lived on a circle. Yes, a circle. My street was an actual circle that you could drive all the way around. And what was weird about it was that my street had houses on all the lots, but the houses on the inside of the circle, including mine, with a perimeter to about 2 acres of free woods. And it was so packed that you couldn't see through it. It was just something everyone knew about, but didn't talk about. Anyway, my school had a media class that you could take, the kind where they tell you to make short films and stuff. A bunch of my friends from the neighborhood and I were grouped together for one of these short film projects. Like idiots, we decided to do a short horror film based off the Blair Witch Project movie. It had been out by that time for a couple of years, so we thought it would be a cool idea since found footage films hadn't really become a thing yet. And we thought since our neighborhood, known for being creepy as fuck at the best of times, had a forest in it, we could just shoot our project there. So, my friends Genesis Hunter, Tyler Cass, and I decided to try to shoot our short film in one evening, and you guessed it, we decided to shoot it in the woods right behind my house. My parents were cool with it because they'd be able to hear me yell if something happened, and we didn't have curfews, so we're like, cool, we'll shoot it on Saturday. Saturday rolls around, and the first 5 hours are fine. Nothing spooky happens. So we go back to my house, eat, and decide to shoot the last couple of scenes. That is when shit went south. We come out of my house, jump the backyard fence, and head back into the woods. The second we hit the tree line, we all feel like something is just off. Like it just doesn't feel right. The air is sticky and heavy. I mean, yeah, it's Texas, and that's a Texas spring for you. But this was different. It felt like walking through water or tar or mud. It was just hard to move forward. But the feeling goes away. We get through a couple more shots, and it's time to shoot the very last scene. It's simple. Genesis walking through the woods and into a clearing. That's it. Like I said, this area is about 2 total acres. We've been all over the woods by this point, getting different shots. But at night it felt like the woods we were in weren't the same woods from that afternoon. The boulders weren't in the right place, the trees weren't in the right place, there was a clearing where there shouldn't have been one. It was really weird. In my mind, I'm thinking, all right, you just got turned around. Happens all the time, right? It's a sizable area. And just because you've been walking around it for 5 hours doesn't mean you know it like the back of your hand. I can accept that. What I can't accept is the fact that there was now a shed in the middle of the clearing that we had decided to shoot our last scene in. What I mean is when we scouted the place 3 days before shooting, when we went in there to check sound earlier that day, and even right before we went back to my house, there was no shed in that woods. None, zip, zero. There were no buildings, no construction supplies, not even a football in that woods. And yet here was the shed in the middle of the clearing. We were all getting vibes from this thing, like we weren't supposed to find it, or we were unwelcome in its presence, or that we were somehow intruding on its alone time. So the guys tell us to hang tight. They're going to go investigate. I don't remember exactly what happened, but I remember them coming back and telling us that we had to check it out. I went up to the shed and realized that it was very, very old. The wood was warped and the walls bowed inwards. The wood from the shed didn't look like any of the trees from that part of Texas. It wasn't mesquite. My best guess would be maybe maple. I was walking around the edge of the shed, and we were trying to figure out where this thing came from, or if it had always been there, and if it had been, how we had managed to miss it. We were close enough to my house that I can hear my dad talking on the phone in the backyard. In fact, all we had to do was walk forward for a minute or two, and we'd hit the backyard fence. That's when I realized the shed had no windows and no doors. I told my friends, and we looked for trapdoors or latches, and Tyler even got on the roof of the shed to check for a way. Not that we wanted in, but at this point I was curious because it didn't feel like the shed should be there, and shouldn't there be an entryway? We didn't find any way into the shed, so we tried to figure out what we should do. The shed was in the middle of the shot, but none of us wanted to shoot it, especially not Genesis. She was having none of it. We were in the middle of deciding to shoot some other time because we were all creeped out when we heard it. A laugh, a long, low, guttural laugh coming from the shed. And then we hear thud, thud, thud. We were close enough to the shed that we could see the wall shake, and we booked it out of there. It took us less than 2 minutes to get back to my backyard. At this point, you're probably thinking that we were high or that this is fictional. And I don't blame you. I wouldn't believe it either if I hadn't been there. But I told my dad we got back, who back then didn't believe in paranormal. It was still relatively early, about 10 p.m. So my dad goes into the house, gets his shotgun, goes to our neighbor who's a cop, who also gets his shotgun, tells us to get inside, and they go into the woods with flashlights and everything. He was gone for 10 minutes. When he got back, he told me that I wasn't allowed to go back there anymore, and we'd have to find something else to do our final scene in. It was years before he told me what happened in the woods, but he finally did. He and our neighbor found the shed, couldn't find door, and heard the laughing. Then they heard growling go from inside the shed to outside the shed. Then, and my dad still swears to this, they saw something huge and human-like come out of the wall of the shed, get down on all fours, turn black, and growl at them. These 2 grown-ass men, both with significant military experience, nearly crapped themselves trying to get back to the house. My dad petitioned the town to get the shed removed, and it was knocked down a week later. We never talked about it again. But here's where it gets weird one more time. My little sister still lives at home. She moved back in because she just got into med school and needed to save some money. She called me a few days ago to tell me that one of the dogs got loose this afternoon and headed for the woods. When she went in there to get it, she saw a dark wood shed. The dog's heart too, and was barking and growling. Then she and the dog heard a growl, and the dog backed up like it was scared and ran home. My little sister didn't know about the shed unless my dad told her, but he says he didn't. I never told her about it because she's younger than me and a bunch of weird stuff had already happened. My sister told my dad, who went back out to see it. He said it was the same shed. He won't say anything else, but I know he's probably panicking. I don't know what to think about all this. I mean, it's just one of the many weird things that happened in that neighborhood when I was a kid, but it always stuck out as being rather ominous. Is it possible that we had collective hysteria? Sure, we were kids, and we were making a short horror film. I mean, is it possible that we just missed the shed? Absolutely. The woods can get confusing even when it's broad daylight. Is it possible that a wild animal is closer to us than we thought, and that's what we heard instead of a weird scream? Of course, it's Texas, and we were known to have big cats running around. But what I can't explain is how the shed my dad had torn down years ago showed back up again, and my sister was the one to find it. That's what I'm having trouble with. My dad had the fire department come take the shed down. They said it was a fire hazard, so they just got rid of it. My sister's safe, my family's safe, and I'm happy to hear that. But why is shed with no windows or doors? I posted this here and elsewhere too, but I haven't found any help yet. I hope somebody can tell me what's going on, because I don't want to be the only one dealing with this. A friend of mine in high school was driving on the Wind River Reservation with his older brother one night. They came upon an elderly lady. She wasn't hitchhiking, but they offered her a ride, and she accepted. About an hour later into the drive, they had totally forgotten that she was in the back seat. My friend turned around, but the seat was empty then. He looked out his window as they were driving along at 65 miles per hour. The old lady was running, next to the car, keeping up with them along the shoulder and laughing at them. However, she was no longer fully human, but had the legs of a mule deer. They stepped on the gas and got the hell out of there.